A warm welcome to the program and thank you always for joining us. Now, Cameroon's government has set up a national committee for disarmament, demobilization and reintegration. A statement from the Cameroonian presidency said the structure aims to provide a framework for the reception and social reintegration of ex-Boko Haram militants and former members of armed groups operating in the northwest and southwest regions of the country. Now, a little background to the unrest or to the crisis situation in Cameroon. Unrest in the northwest and southwest regions began in 2016 when teachers and lawyers staged protest against what they said was a marginalization of English speakers in the mostly French-speaking nation. Now, since then, violence has increased in the country's English-speaking northwest and southwest regions where the armed separatists are fighting for an independent English-speaking state.
The committee based in Yaoundé will be chaired by Prime Minister Philomene Yang and will have centers in Bamenda and Bouwer, the capital cities of the English-speaking regions, as well as in Mora, one of the main cities, in the far north where Boko Haram is present.
Ainsi qu'à Mora, l'une des principales villes de l'extrême nord où sévit Boko Haram.
Ernst Marie Ungup is a Central African senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. He joins us now from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you very much for joining us. The Cameroonian government says it wants to socially reintegrate ex-Boko Haram fighters and those of the unrest in the English-speaking regions. What do you make of this move?
Let us say that this is an idea that is welcome on paper. Moreover, the International Crisis Group, in its August 2018 report, already recommended a DDR process for the fighters from Boko Haram to the far north who have so far surrendered. At the far north, there is a fact that DDR cannot be considered exclusively for Boko Haram fighters, whereas there are entire districts and departments where the presence of vigilance committees is no longer 100% necessary. And they themselves are calling for the social economic reintegration. They're calling for the social economic reintegration to be taken into account when they want to leave the ranks of the vigilance committees. In English-speaking regions, the difficulty is even greater because the conflict is still ongoing, and the demobilization, the integration and remobilization can only be part of an overall process. At the end of this process, they will have to include steps such as discussions on the forms of the state of negotiations with conflict groups and an appropriate political response to the English-speaking conflicts.
Mr. Ungup, you talk about the ongoing conflicts and that the DDR can only be part of an overall process. Now, how then can we interpret the approach that the Cameroonian authorities have given this? To launch a DDR unilaterally?
There are several ways to read the approach of the Cameroonian government. On the one hand, this can be included in its long list of inappropriate or poorly adjusted responses that have been taken by the Cameroonian government since the outbreak of the crisis 2 years ago. On the other hand, we can consider that the Cameroonian government maintains its line according to how it sees it discussed on the equal footing with the separatists and certainly not with the armed separatists, and therefore takes unilateral initiatives without having to consult them or enter into a process of dialogue or discourse with the latter. And the third possibility is to read that this is the Cameroonian government hopes, but this maneuver to create doubt within certain armed separatist groups, and that they are aware that the balance of military forces on the ground is not the advantage, can unilaterally lay down their arms, at least for some of them, join centers that will be made available to them, because down there, it will make it possible to weaken the de facto, the secessionist movements, which, if you follow this logic, will lose the fighters if the call of the Cameroonian government is heard by some of them. The process of DDR involves money, but does the Cameroonian government have the means to lead this process?
Pour l'instant, il n'y a pas encore un budget.
For the moment, it does not yet have a budget that has been voted or decided by the Cameroonian government to go in that direction. Moreover, the same decree says that part of the funding should come from the state, but the other part from the international organizations, including the United Nations, which would like to make donations. In other words, if an English-speaking veteran were to surrender, there is not an already effective budget line that would allow it to be taken into account. So, to sum up, what we can say is that there is a question of the detail of how these different centers will be set up to accommodate these disarmed individuals, which has not been clarified. There's also the question of mistrust between the two parties, which still needs to be overcome, perhaps by some symbolic actions of the Cameroonian government in case it still refuses to engage in a process of dialogue and negotiation.
You're talking about symbolic actions on the part of the government to build confidence. Now, would reducing the strong presence of government soldiers in the zones be a welcome move in this vein?
This is one of the steps that should have been put in place before a DDR was achieved. When you want to put a DDR in place, the first thing to do is to recognize the existence of the Anglophone crisis and the validity of some of the Anglophone demands. From this, you can take a series of measures that are both political, symbolic, and also in the direction of relaxation between the different parties. One of these measures is to decide on a ceasefire between the two sides. That is even before the actual talks begin. However, not only was there no real inclusive dialogue, the ceasefire between the two parties was not, but above all, the government indirectly opposed an initiative for dialogue that has been initiated by a retired cardinal of the Catholic Church and other religious leaders, which initiatives could have been a real step forward in bringing the parties in conflict closer together.
Hans de Marie, I'd like to thank you for your insights. Thank you very much for sharing with us. And Hans de Marie Ungup, the Central Africa Senior Analyst at the International Crisis Group, thank you very much for speaking to us. He was speaking to us there from Nairobi, Kenya.
Et on va passer à présent aux autres grands titres de l'actualité.
You're still watching the Morning Call. Let's head to the African Journal for more.